can we pursue health promoting behaviors without it being about our body size? Yes. Can we decide to include foods that promote health for a certain disease state? Yes. Does that have to be about restriction and depriving our bodies? No.
Guys, we are so excited to let you hear from our guest this week. Abbie Attwood is an anti-diet nutritionist with a master's degree in clinical nutrition and integrative health. She provides nutrition therapy and body image coaching for her clients through one-on-one counseling and group programs. Abbie's philosophy is rooted in intuitive eating, fat positive, weight inclusive care, and health at every size approach. And our podcast with her was incredible.
I'm so excited. You guys are absolutely going to love this. It has something for everyone, and it is so important. And this woman is doing the thing, and I'm so proud. Like, I'm literally proud to release this podcast because I think it's one of those ones that you're going to listen to more than once. It's so good. It's so important, and I know for myself that there are things in this podcast that are life changing. I'm not even joking. I'm not being dramatic. I'm always dramatic, but this is.
But we're taking a break from the usual drama to bring you real life drama.
Break from my typical crazy behavior, erratic and all, because this woman is so good, and the way that she introduces these themes are just it really is something for everyone in this one. So I can't wait for you guys to hear it. We love you, and that's why we make these. So enjoy Abbie.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Kelsea.
And I'm Rachael. We have a great guest for you guys today. We have Abbie Attwood, who is going to be your be-all, end-all on all the information that you need to start healing your relationship with food, with your body, with how you look at eating, and being that it's something we have to do every day, multiple times a day, this needs to be on the top of all of our priority lists. So we are so glad to have Abbie with us. Abbie, thank you so much for being here today.
Aw, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this discussion. And I want to start with, you have a really complicated or intricate backstory with what led you to your career today, helping women overcome anxiety surrounding food and body image. Can you let us know where you started and how you got to this place in your journey?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it short, although I'm not known for that.
They want to hear it.
That's okay. Yeah. So, I was actually really fortunate to grow up in when I think back to my childhood, I had a very normal relationship with food. I guess I wasn't really exposed to a lot of diet culture or dieting when I was younger. And a lot of that is just because of my thin privilege and my family's thin privilege. It just wasn't something that was really present in my life. I grew up being able to, eat any foods that I wanted. We were like that house that had all the good snacks, when I was a kid. And, I don't remember. I spend a lot of time thinking about this now because I talk to clients so often about, their upbringing and how food played a role. And I don't remember any kind of morality around food. So I was really lucky. And that lasted for me for a while, honestly, through high school. It really wasn't until college that I started getting exposed to what I now know were very disordered eating behaviors in people that I was spending time with, and just people dieting and counting calories and just eating in a way that I was so unfamiliar with. And I remember people in college, my friends, being like, what the hell? Because I would get anything. I would, be in line for the pasta. I would be, have bowls of cereal after dinner. So I was kind of this strange species, but those messages really started kind of taking hold of me in college. And at the same time, I'd grown up an athlete. And I think that's a really important part of my story. Like I was very much, played a sport every season. And I was actually a big lacrosse player. But when I got to college, I kind of got into running. And it was something my family had been really into, but I hadn't. I'd always been kind of like a team sport athlete. And I think the running thing also coincided with some of the eating starting to get disordered. And it really wasn't about anything other than, I think, a control mechanism for my anxiety. Like I was always a super anxious kid, and I in college started having a lot more anxiety, a lot more kind of, I had panic attacks and I really didn't know why, but running and controlling food started becoming this really maladaptive, unhealthy coping mechanism. But at the time, I think it saved me from spiraling in a lot of ways, which is hard to say because you don't want, a disorder. But it's a lot of people's story is like it started at a time when they needed control. They needed something to help them feel safe. And unfortunately, those things then stick with us when we feel like reliant on them. So it started that way. And then it really spiraled. It's so hard to look back and really figure out why and how, but that's diet culture for you, right? Like you just start doing a little bit of restriction, and then you start restricting a little more, and then you get a little bit more obsessed with your body image, and then you get the praise and the compliments, and it drives it even further. And I started competing and running at a pretty high level, and being in the running community definitely didn't help. I mean, I think we know running's like a very lean, quote unquote, type of sport. And there's this quote unquote runner's body, which is just PS bullshit. Anyone can run at any body size, but it was not helpful. And that really started me down that disordered path for sure.
I love how you, framed some of your eating disorder as part of a coping mechanism, because I think that's a really important part of, looking at some of the disordered eating habits and looking at where they start and where they stem from. Because there's so much shame around, disordered eating and, having an eating disorder and being able to recognize it. And then there's a ton of like self-blame that goes on there. And then being able to like step back and look at the whole picture, as in like, I struggled with anxiety. I was looking for a lot of control. And an easy way for a lot of us to get control over something is something that we do every day. And we know that we're going to have to make choices for our food and our intake every day. So it's kind of like it's set up to be one of those things where like, well, I can control this. And then, of course, anything that we grasp for that tight that has such an impact can turn in a different way. But I love how you put that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, and I think it's important. I like, just like you said, the shame and the self-blame that's wrapped up in eating disorders and disordered eating, it's really damaging. And I think if we can look back and say, I was doing my best, this is the thing that I knew how to do to stay honestly alive for a lot of people, right? And that's not to say it's a good thing, and that's not to say that I would do it the same way. If I went back, no way in hell would I do that again to myself. But I can look back with compassion and say, I'm not a failure for having like made that turn down that path. It was the only thing I knew how to do to stay safe. Like that's what it felt like at the time, right? Like creating safety. And just like you said, we're set up like not just, yeah, we do this thing every day, but also because we live in a culture that moralizes those behaviors. And so when you're in a place where you're seeking more self-worth or more self-acceptance or more of a sense of belonging and safety, it feels really good to be doing these things that the culture says are like morally superior and virtuous and quote unquote healthy, right? Like that's where it all gets so messed up, because then you feel like a quote unquote good person as you're simultaneously, let's face it, killing yourself, starving yourself, like being a total jerk to yourself. But all the while it's like, no, this is healthy. This is disciplined. This is right. All of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So with
and
that
like,
experience, sorry, with
so
that
no,
experience, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say that that it being wrapped up in the compliments too, is just like such a huge part of that, because like that morality is just it exists in your own mind, and then it's fed back to you, so that it's confirmed. It's like confirmation bias. Like, yes, it is superior because look at all these people around me saying, "Look at you, you're being so good," and
Yeah.
look at how you're gonna race so well on Saturday because of all of these
Yes.
things you're doing, and like coming from coaches and coming from peers, and it just really confirms all of that you're saying that already exists culturally and we're already brought up with. So it's like a weird ass web.
Isn't it? And it's so messed up too, because all the while you're self-harming, but you're getting complimented for self-harming. And it's awful, right? It's another reason why we really have to, as a society, stop commenting on people's bodies and their behaviors with food, because we never know what's going on with someone. You could be complimenting an eating disorder, right? Which is exactly what happened to me and happens to like all the folks that I work with, because and that creates the fear associated with healing from disordered eating, because what happens when those compliments stop, right? Then you're like, shit, I'm doing something wrong. People don't think highly of me anymore. Or even worse, I'm losing my identity, right? As the quote unquote healthy one, or the runner, or the whatever you do that you've attached your identity to with food. It's so scary to lose that when you've been used to the compliments, even though the whole time it was just about, restriction.
Yeah, what happens when it stops and when your identity is so closely tied to the size of your body? That comes with a clothing size, that comes with, being thin, or like whatever it is. Like when our identity is so wrapped up in that, it's a dangerous game to try and even make an attempt to heal from that, because what are you stepping away from? So with that experience, can you talk about how what led you to what you're doing now?
Yeah. Something I didn't mention was that in that time when I was really deep in my eating disorder, I can now recognize that as an eating disorder. By the way, at the time, I was very resistant to like admitting that that was what was going on. But what happened throughout that time is I actually got diagnosed with a slew of autoimmune diseases. And I don't think that's like just a coincidence. When our bodies are in a state of deprivation and we're not feeding them enough, we're not treating them well, we're running them into the ground with exercise, we're really harming our immune system and our body's ability to take care of ourselves, like at multiple levels, right? And so I think a big part of the turning point in my story was the diagnosis of many autoimmune conditions. There was a neurological one, there was celiac disease, there was asthma, and then later a pituitary one, and then another endocrine disorder. And who's to say that these wouldn't have happened anyways? But I do think that was a big part of it, and that brought me into this new realm of diet culture, the like autoimmune and quote unquote wellness sphere of diet culture, of like heal yourself with food, right? Which is just another disordered path, and it sucks because it takes advantage of people who are suffering from medical conditions, and it puts personal responsibility on them to quote unquote heal themselves with food, when that's not evidence-based medicine whatsoever, right? I mean, we should not be demonizing medications or other ways of like handling medical conditions. But that was another part of my story. And I started realizing through that process, because I was at the time starting to heal from my eating disorder and going down this other rabbit hole, I started realizing like, this is the same shit. like under a different name.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's more restriction, more elimination, more food obsession. And it's again, it's taking away from me living my life. Like how much time am I spending on this? And from there, I went into another version of it, which was like, I need to start eating more. And I got coerced into like the macro counting space of like, here's how to make sure you're eating enough, right? Count all your macros, count your calories to make sure you're eating enough. And so I convinced myself, oh, I'm doing this. It's not restriction. It's like, I'm trying to eat more. But in reality, that was just me trying to control this whole thing again. Right. And so it was at that point, it was the macro counting where I was like, oh my God, this has got to end. And so I started working with someone. I got support from a therapist. And I started talking about it more openly with my friends, with my partner, and I really started healing at that point. But it got me really interested in helping other people avoid the pitfalls that I had. And so eventually I left my corporate job. I went back to get my master's in nutrition, and I dove head first into the anti-diet and intuitive eating space, just realizing how messed up all of this is. Like, because at the core of it, it's because of the culture we live in that any of us feel like controlling the size of our body or the food that we eat is in any way morally virtuous, right? Like if we didn't live in this culture, none of us would resort to those coping mechanisms because they wouldn't be viewed as quote unquote good, as the quote unquote right thing to do, as healthy, right? So I started really unwrapping the like social justice angle of this, looking into health at every size and anti-fat bias in our culture. And once I saw that, I mean, they say like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it was so true for me. Like I was like, I can't continue down this path for myself when I would never want this for somebody else. And when I believe that all bodies deserve respect, why am I trying to shrink my body? What does that say about other people's bodies? What does that say about other people? And from there on, it was just like the floodgates were open. I was never going back. And I kind of dove headfirst and opened up a private practice, and the rest is history, I guess.
What a beautiful story of just like full circle shit right there. And
Yeah.
I just, I always love when we hear from, professionals in the space that have such a strong tie to the principles in which they're now working with clients on. And I just want to stop for a second and recognize people who went through something and with that said like, nobody else, not under my watch. Like this is those are the helpers. Those are the helpers. And I just want to thank you for being a helper because it's really important and like it's life-changing stuff. And I know that you hear that from your clients all the time, but you should hear it again. So
I do. I sometimes feel like I ran out of like a burning building and then I was like, wait a minute. Ran back in and now I'm just like grabbing people.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, it's true with like you can't unsee it though. Like once you like step back and you're like, wait a minute, these are all the same. You're like, oh no. Like I know that like I've been like how, similarly like started in different ways and was like, oh, maybe Whole30 is better and like maybe paleo is better and maybe like going in different angles, and they're all part of my story, and I'm I don't have any I look back at them with a ton of compassion, but also it's just like once you see it from a societal standpoint and then you look at it, how it affected your life, you're like, I have to tell everyone.
Yes. Everyone needs to know this. Yeah. And it gets so tricky because, at the same time, we can't help anyone who's not ready to receive help. So while there might be like, millions of people in that burning building, it's only the people that actually are willing to see what's going on for themselves that are ready to get help and are actually ready to heal from it, because you can't force anyone You can't force anyone to see it. They won't until they're ready. And I think that's been a really big part of like maturity as a practitioner for me, is realizing it's not my job to save people.
Mm.
It's not my job to convince people of this. I'm here to support people who are ready
Yeah.
to kind of step out of the fire and heal. But it's hard. It's really hard because you see it everywhere. I'm sure you both know, like it's everywhere in TV shows, in like the holidays are coming up and it's just a total battleground of diet culture language and,
Oh God, it's
your
everywhere.
friendships.
Yeah,
It's
the radio.
everywhere.
Every time I
Yeah.
turn on the radio and hear one of those commercials for juice squeezes, that's what's happening
Ugh.
around us right
Yeah.
now. I get like I put this on my story. Like I get irrationally angry, and I have to
Yeah.
like shut it
Yeah.
off. And I'm like, stop doing that to people. They're like, up, and you're going into the holidays. You're gonna show up at parties. You better get your juice squeezes and stop eating. And I'm like, what are we telling people? Like you just
Yeah. What
said
are we
that with a
doing?
microphone. Like how?
It's awful. It's awful. And you can get fired up all the time.
Yeah.
And I eventually had to realize, like, take a breath, Abby. Like this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like, it's diet culture isn't going away in our lifetime, sadly, but we can keep fighting. It's just pace yourself, right? Rest. Like, we have to practice what we preach, right? It's not like more hustle and more capitalism. It's like let's let's help people that want to receive help.
Yeah, that is really hard, and I'm glad that we all three talked that through, because I think we all three could use that kind of
A
reminder.
little therapy. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the baseline from which we are viewing food and eating, because I saw, a recent slide that you did, and you called eating an inherently emotional experience. And I think that is so poignant, but also it's everywhere you look, the message is stop using food for joy. That is something like an animal would do. Stop, like everything surrounding emotion and eating is like an automatic no. Diet culture is like, that makes you bad, quote unquote. I did air bunnies. You are saying inherently it's emotional, and diet culture is saying don't you dare make it emotional. So can we talk about this juxtaposition a little bit?
Can we? Yes. I love this topic because I I think that almost everyone that comes to work with me has somehow started to believe that they're a quote unquote emotional eater. And like, cue the blame and shame again that we talked about earlier. I think that something that helps is to think back to, like, if you've ever been around a baby, think about what they do when they're hungry. Right? They cry.
Mm-hmm.
They cry. And then what does it feel like when they've eaten and they're full? Like, they're so happy, sometimes they fall asleep. Like, it's just eating is joyful, eating is pleasure. Eating is emotional. It is very emotional to give your body energy. It is very emotional to like feel that type of fullness and safety from food, right? Like, from just a like evolutionary standpoint, food has always been and will always be part of like the reason we survive, right? And that's so especially when you're in a place of, I like to explain to people, like, when you're in a place of like restriction and you're not giving yourself enough food, you're going to end up feeling even more emotional around food because you're primally hungry all the time. And so if you're restricting, you're going to end up feeling chaotic around food. You're going to end up feeling like you quote unquote can't control yourself. And that's this whole other angle. So we've got, like, eating is inherently emotional, right? We feel happy when we eat. We feel joy when we eat. We feel pleasure. We just feel satisfaction, right? I mean, think about how, like, just the term hangry. Like, when we're hungry, we feel emotional. Once we've been fed, we feel emotion about that. We're emotional beings, And it's also true that like you can be sad and eat at the same time without it being like morally wrong that you're eating while you're sad, right? Like those two things can happen at the same time. And we have to know that like eating is soothing in its own way. And it's not wrong or bad to eat in response to emotions either. Like that's a completely normal coping mechanism. You know what I think is really ironic is like diet culture praises you for exercising in response to like sadness or anxiety or whatever. It's like, oh, go that's oh, it's so healthy of you to do that, right? And yet when we eat in response to those feelings, somehow it's shameful and bad. When doesn't it make way more sense to give your body energy when you're under a state of stress than it does to go out and stress your body out more with a workout? Like it just to me it's so frustrating that this has become something that's shameful.
I love that you said hangry because that was as you were talking, that was the one that immediately came to my mind because like I will notice hangry the most because I haven't had meals in a while. I start stomping around. I'm very short with people, and then I'm like, you need to eat something, and then you will be a more pleasant human, and like don't interact with anyone else
Totally.
until you've eaten something. Like I
Totally.
know it.
Always tell people like stop identifying as a hangry person. Like people are like, "Oh, I'm such a hangry person." I'm like, "No, you just haven't eaten enough." Like
Yeah.
it's not an identity, it's not a personality trait. When we get hangry, we've gone too long without food.
Yes.
Period. Hard stop. Like you don't deserve to become irritable and moody and like upset,
Mhm.
right? You deserve energy.
Yeah.
And it's just, such a harmful message, you know? And what all it does is drive that like shame cycle because if you feel guilty for what you perceive as being emotional eating and something that's wrong or bad, then cue the restriction the next day, right? Like you wake up the next morning and you feel like shit about yourself because diet culture has told you you've done something quote unquote wrong. And then it keeps you in that cycle again. You restrict all day, you try to be quote unquote good all day. And then what happens at night? Like more of that feeling of hanger, of primal hunger, of what feels like more emotional eating. And you just stay stuck in that cycle when if we just allow ourselves to eat for pleasure, like Rachael, you were saying, what the hell is with this? Like, why aren't we allowed to do things just for the purpose of joy, just for the purpose of pleasure? Diet culture takes that from us in every way. And we just look at food as if it's like just fuel. And we ignore that there's so much nostalgia in food. And if we don't eat for joy and pleasure, we're not satisfied. I mean, think about a meal that you eat that doesn't feel joyful or pleasurable. Like you eat that like it was like the steamed broccoli and the chicken, right? Like there's no pleasure in that and therefore after that meal, you're going to be looking for something else. And guess what? You're going to be like, "Oh, God, I'm such an emotional eater. What's wrong with me? I just ate food." When it's like, well, you did, but you didn't fill that emotional need that you have with food. And so you need something else. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
it's such a there's multiple ways to deprive yourself,
Yes,
and like
100%.
people just think of it calorically, but there is that component that you have to include. And we always say this, when it comes to what people binging late at night, we always talk about what is going on during the day because it's not that one moment at night that is the issue here. We need to look at all of the things leading up to that, which was that you had a salad at lunch when you really wanted a sandwich. And you had steamed broccoli and chicken for dinner when you really wanted lasagna. You know what I mean? And it's
Mhm.
not about, it's not about taking away any shred of health. And I want to get into that next. But and like totally saying, whatever, it's a free for all. But not including that component is you're inherently setting yourself up for totally inconsistent behaviors, because it's going to continue to be a need that you're going to be deprived of, and it's going to come at some point. You're only putting it off.
Absolutely. It's that, like, it's mental restriction, right? It's like, it's not allowing yourself the full experience of what it means to be satisfied from food. And you're putting yourself in that perpetual state of a scarcity mindset with food. And it's only going to drive binge behavior. It's only going to drive more guilt and shame around food and food rules that keep you feeling stuck. When if you just lean into what sounds good, just like you said, like, just having that lasagna, if that's what sounds good, I can guarantee that you'll feel more peaceful around food the rest of the evening. And usually the food that we tend to like overeat or binge on are the foods that we're not freely allowing ourselves to eat, especially during the day, right? And so a lot of times it's like breaking those rules about, like, are you not letting yourself eat some ice cream in the middle of the day if that's what you want? Are you not, right? Like, are you not letting yourself have chips with your sandwich and then you end up like in the pantry, like face deep in the chips later just because you wouldn't let yourself have them earlier? There's nothing wrong with any of these behaviors, like the eating the chips later, eating the ice cream later. Those are wonderful. But the fact that we feel chaotic and out of control around those foods is a direct result of the fact that we've labeled those foods as quote unquote bad and something that we're not allowing ourselves to enjoy.
Yeah, I'm really glad, I'm really glad we have this baseline, and I want to definitely address what we've seen when we've presented these kinds of ideas from certain women who have said, I know my relationship with food is unhealthy. I want to make changes surrounding my relationship with food. However, my doctor said that my health markers are poor and I am falling in, this category, and that I really need to drop body fat or drop body weight, or whatever ways in which these health professionals are putting this forward to people, saying that, their health is suffering as a result of their eating habits or their lack of movement. Can we heal our relationship with food? And at the same time, can we have health markers and decreasing body fat as a means of increasing, those good, healthy markers that, maybe will help us live longer? Is that a thing?
Well, there's a lot in that question. So first, can we pursue health promoting behaviors without it being about our body size? Yes. Can we decide to include foods that promote health for a certain disease state? Yes. Does that have to be about restriction and depriving our bodies? No. The other part of the question, when doctors try and pin weight loss as the solution to certain health markers, no. Like, we do not have evidence supporting that as an intervention that will actually help someone become healthier. Because what we see in any type of intentional weight loss is weight cycling.
Yeah.
We see people regain the weight and more in the long term. And this is not me saying weight gain is bad. I'm hoping that everyone can know that from this conversation so far. There's nothing wrong with you for gaining weight. The point is that dieting doesn't work. The point is that intentionally trying to lose weight means inherently putting your body in a state of deprivation. Your body will fight back. Diets don't work in the long term. We see 98% of people regain the weight. And what's happening with those 2% that are quote unquote successful? They're most likely maintaining eating disorder behaviors for the rest of their lives just to maintain that weight loss. And that is no way to live. So when doctors prescribe weight loss as a means to achieve more health, they're prescribing disordered eating. They're prescribing weight cycling. And they're participating in weight stigma and anti-fat bias, which we know is harmful to somebody's health. We know oppression and stigma and discrimination creates more stress, puts somebody at risk for cardiovascular disease, put people at risk for avoidance of medical care. When you expect to go to the doctor and be shamed for your weight and have a doctor assume that you don't eat healthy or that you don't engage in movement just because of your body size, would you want to go? No, no one. And so what happens is we have avoidance of medical care. We have weight cycling, which is linked to the development of chronic disease because it's a stress on your body. And we have weight stigma. Again, weight stigma and weight cycling have been shown to can account for any of the health disparities that we see between people of larger bodies and smaller bodies when it comes to the BMI, which is a whole other thing I can get into because the BMI is just absolutely problematic. But I hope that's helpful. Like, yes, we can engage in health promoting behaviors without it being about diet culture. 100%. Diet culture has just co-opted health and made it about thinness, right? Health is individual. Health is not a moral obligation, but we get to choose what's healthy for ourselves. We just have to remember that restriction is not healthy. Dieting is not healthy. Body shame is not healthy, right? Oppression and stigma, not healthy. But can we add things to our plate that like improve certain health markers in some disease states? 100%. Yes.
Well, can I just start with thank you for that incredible answer.
The most incredible answer.
Like, I almost like, I don't even want, like, I don't even want to, like, I want to just pause on that because it was such an incredible answer. And I'm so just like over the moon thrilled with it.
Play it back. I want to hear that.
Just like play it back because like, I even find, I have a really hard time answering with a lot of women who say, well, like, well, my doctor said this. And like, without just being like, your doctor is wrong. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I just, like, give me their number and like find a new one and then find a new one after that. And like the advice that they're giving, a lot of practitioners are giving to people is so far off the mark from health that I can't even imagine that they're going in there to talk about their health, because the feedback that they're getting has absolutely nothing to do with their health. It is creating such a stigma around the size of their body, and it ignores, for a lot of women, the symptoms that they're presenting with, whether how they're feeling, how they're if they're feeling pain, if they're feeling, different things with their body. It ignores them and then places the blame back on them for the size of their body and potentially what their lifestyles look like, when it is so far from accuracy and just addressing the issue of what they came in there to present. So how can women even be expected to go in and trust their doctor's advice with, I'm having some abdominal pain, I'm feeling lethargic all the time, when they know that the answer is immediately going to, if you are not in a smaller body, immediately going to be, well, that's your fault. Because that's basically the answer. Right?
Yep.
Like, I'm going
all the
to
time
disregard everything that you just told me about the way that you're feeling. I'm not even going to address it or give you helpful advice. I'm going to tell you that it's your fault. Like, it's a maddening cycle.
Weight stigma and fat phobia harms everyone.
Yes.
Because not only what happens is folks in larger bodies and fat bodies are overdiagnosed with things because doctors assume that they have some kind of chronic problem going on just because of their weight. When if somebody was presenting with the same things in a smaller body, they would never even think twice about it. But you know what it also does? It also harms people in smaller bodies because doctors will assume that they're quote unquote healthy just because they're in a small body. That happened to me. I mean, all the time. Like, my autoimmune diseases went undiagnosed for a really long time because doctors were like, "Oh, you're healthy just by looking at me," right? And the same thing happens with people in larger bodies. They look at someone in a larger body and assume they're unhealthy, when that absolutely, you can never ever tell someone's health status by looking at them. Hard stop. Never. You can't tell somebody's health behaviors based on looking at them, and those assumptions are so harmful. And I'll often advise clients, like, when a doctor prescribes weight loss for you for a condition that you go in for true support, and like you were saying, like, how is this doctor holding space for health if they are actively harming this person's emotional and mental health in the process?
Yeah.
I always say, ask them, what would you suggest to somebody in a smaller body who had the exact same symptoms as me? Tell me, right? Because you wouldn't prescribe weight loss. So tell me, what intervention would you prescribe if they were presenting with the same thing?
Because I want that
right?
one.
I want
I'll
that.
take
Take
that
me
one.
to that. Yeah.
Two of those.
Exactly. It's absolutely maddening because you're not providing evidence-based medical care, but you're also not providing patient-centered care. You're not providing compassionate care, and you're not providing equitable care.
So I think that's a good segue to talk about set point weight for a minute, because this is sort of a newer concept. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with it yet, but I think it's like so important, especially when we talk to women who are setting a quote unquote goal weight, or are talking about, um, their weight in high school, or how they see themselves in their mind, how they see health looking on them, and the struggles in losing weight. And obviously we'll talk about calorie counting in a little bit, and how this plays into it. But can you explain some of the science behind set point weight and like how it factors into nutrition and health?
Yeah, that's a great question. It comes up a lot lately because people are hearing more and more about this. I think the most important thing to understand is that each of our bodies has a happy place, I like to call it. I think set point can be misleading in the sense that it gives this idea that maybe it's this very specific number, right? Which is it's harmful in and of itself to think that our bodies would ever be able to stick to a really specific number. Like that just reminds you of like getting on the scale and feeling like, if it goes up just 1 or 2, it's like, no, our bodies fluctuate a lot, right? And so set point in and of itself can be misleading, but I think set point weight range is how I like to talk about it. And what that just means is, yeah, our bodies have a weight range where they feel safe and where they feel healthy. And it's where they're going to strive to be. It's kind of like thinking about your body as regulating itself like a thermostat, right? And so if you try to push your body below this range where it's happy and healthy and feels safe, it's going to fight back to get to that range again. And I think anyone who's ever dieted knows what happens when they stop dieting, right? Or even how dieting gets harder over time because your body's metabolism adjusts, right? And slows down because your body has all these protective mechanisms in place to keep your body in that weight range where it's happy and healthy. And the same thing goes for your body being higher than that range. It's no different. Your body wants to be in this place. And actually, it's mostly genetically predetermined. It's like we have this blueprint. And at the root of like the set point weight range theory is really understanding that body diversity is real. We're not all meant to look the same. And so each of us has this kind of homeostasis where our bodies are going to go when basically it happens when we are not restricting our food intake, when we're not obsessively exercising, essentially when you're not trying to micromanage the size of your body with food and exercise, you will find your set point weight range.
What a great answer. Also, because we kind of get this number set in our minds for a lot of women who, if you have been at that number, you have these rosy colored glasses as to what that looked like and felt like at the time, and at a totally different point in your life that has not really any relevance to the life that you're living right now on a daily basis. And it always looks different than it actually felt. And like that's my like general feel behind that, and the fact that we put this like number that we should stay at for the rest of our lives. And I'm 100% guilty of this. Because like I had a number that I was like, well, that's my one to like stay at, and then went to a doctor appointment and I wasn't at that number, and I was like, what does this mean? And had like a quick existential crisis. And then I was like, what are you doing? Like, what did you just place a whole bunch of value on for like how you're feeling. You just reevaluated how you are feeling on a day-to-day basis, like the energy that you have, the sleep that you have, the, you know, the life that you're living, that you feel like, you know, you're moving and you're sustaining, and you know, feel happy and healthy, and like that you don't have any restrictions going on. And then like at one point someday someone weighed you and said like, you're off your numbers that you were supposed to stay for the next 90 years. Like, no, that's not what we're married to, right?
It's so damaging, like just the idea. And you can see how it gets so obsessive, right? Because if you get really fixated on this place where you think you quote unquote should be at a weight, it feeds this fixation on your body and this fixation on food. And this goes back to like that diet culture is a system of oppression. It literally oppresses women. Like, think about the time and energy women
Yes.
spend. And not that this doesn't affect men, but it disproportionately affects female identifying folks. You are missing out on your life.
Yeah.
Because you are focused on this number. Like, that is, I mean, we have been tricked.
We have
been bamboozled. This is not why we're on this earth. We're not on this earth to try and micromanage our body and stay at some specific number that some machine tells us, right? Like when we step on it, like think about what that, sometimes I think about like if aliens invaded the earth and like saw us all getting on this thing every morning and like looking at a number, like what they'd be like, what in the actual hell is happening? Like, and we're all like, okay, there's my worthiness for the day. Like that number pops up. Okay, now based on that, I can only eat XYZ today, and I should probably do this workout. Like, what? It's a prison. It's a prison. And it keeps us from like actually holding positions of power and like using our energy and time in other ways. Like it is, I think that's another thing that I saw when I came into the space of like, holy crap, like this is just this one giant painful distraction.
I love that you said that, because I often do the alien thing too, where I'm like, what would they think if they looked down and were like, what are these people obsessing over? And honestly, one of my main motivators that has come, you know, full circle has been like, what could you spend? What could you do in this world?
Yes.
How could you impact this world if you stopped focusing on the size of your body, the number on a scale, these really insignificant things that take up so much mental energy and space in your life and so much focus? Where could you adjust that focus to live a life that you are happy with, and that you can create this like major impact here that actually matters? Because the number will never actually matter. No one cares. Like it will never actually matter. But what, as women, like opportunity that we have, because we have to like reframe it to an opportunity.
Oh, Rachael, I remember her. She weighed 135.
Yeah.
I say that to my clients all the time. I'm like, I know this sounds morbid, but like, let's go to your funeral for a second, because like, is that what you want to be remembered for? Is that who you are? Does that align with your values as a human being? Like, because what happens when you wake up 80 years old? Are you going to look back at your life and regret this? I can absolutely guarantee that you will. I can absolutely guarantee that you'll look back and wish that you'd allowed yourself to be happy, that you'd accepted yourself as you are. And then instead of using that time and energy to control the size of your body, you realize you're on this planet for so much more than that. And that life would have been better and more fulfilling and happier had you put in the time to heal yourself from that and then gone on to live your life. Because you know what sucks is that diet culture convinces us that our body image and our self-esteem and our self-worth is actually going to improve with restriction, and all it does is damage that. Because how can we possibly have more self-compassion, more self-esteem, more confidence when we're constantly beating ourselves up and criticizing ourselves and judging ourselves? We know inherently that if we did that to somebody else, our relationship with that person would absolutely suffer. And yet we think that we can be complete a-holes to ourselves and that we're going to feel better about ourselves at the end of that. No way. No way.
Yeah.
I'm saying this shit keeps me up at night, Abby.
Yeah.
The amount women could get the amount of impact
Yes.
in the world
Yes.
if this was like and also the like idea of, like you said, it let me totally annihilate myself. Oh, I want more confidence.
Yes.
This is my favorite. I want more confidence, and I know that the way to do that is to lose weight, and I'm going to beat myself down to do it, and I'm going to restrict, and I'm going to look in the mirror every day and pick myself apart, and that's how I'm going to get more confidence.
Wild, right? Confidence comes from a deep sense of self-trust. Diet culture erodes that self-trust at every turn. It tells you you can't trust your body. You can't trust your hunger. You need to count your calories. You need to step on the scale. You need to control yourself. You need to have willpower. It absolutely disconnects us from our bodies. And how can we ever feel better about ourselves if we don't trust in who we are and just the wisdom of our body?
Yeah.
We can't.
No, absolutely not. I think that's a great segue into something that I wanted to touch on when it comes to calorie counting, because, anytime, we're in the health and fitness space, and anytime women kind of like enter in the health and fitness space, they're hit with count your calories. That is the only way to live a healthy lifestyle. And that's really what diet culture hangs its hat on. And that creates a culture where women know offhand dozens of foods how many calories are in them.
Yeah.
Like they've memorized it. They know they can look at something and just kind of rattle it off. Can you talk about calorie counting when it comes to nutrition, and maybe even just like where women should start?
Yeah, this is such an important one, and it's so tough. I just want to send compassion to anyone who's going through this, because you nailed it. Like, it's not even just the act of letting go of the physical tracking and counting, it's the mental gymnastics and just the memorization of all these foods that exist long after. And it's painful because you're like, I really want to get away from this. Even if you've decided, like, I want to stop doing this, you realize, but I still know all the calories in all of this food that I'm eating. And it's really frustrating. I get this question constantly. I think the first tip is, and I think this is probably an obvious one, but if you haven't stopped physically tracking and counting, you got to start there, right? Like, you can't overcome this if you're still feeling like wedded to that process. And I know that's really scary. So if that even in and of itself feels super overwhelming right now, maybe you just dip your toe in and you go a few days without tracking. And then what you have to do is you have to expose yourself to this new way of being, like not writing this stuff down, not tracking it, and realize you're okay. Like, you're okay. So try it maybe a few days at first and then do it more, right? I'd say just stop altogether. But the next thing I would do is really examine like how rigid you're being with the types of foods you're eating, because if you can start to branch out with what you're eating, in theory, you'll probably have less of those foods memorized, right? If they're new and different foods. A lot of times, what happens with calorie counting and macro counting is that people get really reliant on specific foods that they know fit their calories or fit their macros. And so, one of the other things I always suggest is like really start to challenge what it is that you're allowing yourself to eat, because chances are you've got a lot of foods memorized that are like your safe foods, right? And not so much the foods that aren't. Um, and then another tip, and I think this helped for me immensely in getting away from this, was like releasing control of food preparation, leaning more into takeout food, buying prepared foods, letting people cook for me. Because when you do those things, you don't have control and you don't know all of the counts, right? And so you're just kind of you're allowing and not micromanaging like we do when we're tracking and counting.
Yeah, and I just, I'm so glad that you opened with like just sending compassion out to people, because
Really hard.
I do not have a history of disordered eating, and I see the calorie counts on menus and in restaurants, and I get weird.
Yeah.
And I've not suffered with this. I've never counted calories. And I don't know. I don't have an offhand list of how many calories are in things. And I get anxious when I see the calorie counts and I go, oh, maybe I should pick something different.
Yeah.
So it's a real freaking jungle out there. And I'm so glad that you said like, hey guys, let's take baby steps. Let's meet you where you can, because there's a lot to fight against, and sometimes you get tired, and it's okay. It's okay to get tired, and it's okay to feel like this is just like a battle that you can never win, and it's okay to rest, because there are a lot of things going on that we are going to have to unlearn, and it's going to take a while. And I just think that that's a really important thing to just send out there, that it's okay that this is not going to happen in a week. It's okay that you're not going to feel
Yeah.
comfortable,
Yeah.
not counting.
100%. Like, and I think with that, we have to understand, why are you counting in the first place? Like, what is it providing you with? Right. Going back to like how we started this conversation, like having compassion for yourself, having stumbled into tracking or disordered eating in the first place, like there's a reason you started. Like, in what way is it serving as a, a form of control or safety? Right. And for a lot of us, that is exactly what it is. It's this idea of like controlling and feeling some sense of certainty in this totally uncertain, messy world. And coming at that and saying, like, is this actually keeping me safe, or is this keeping me from living my life? Like, is this actually me being in control, or am I being controlled by this thing? Right. And really unpacking, like, what is it that you feel when you're tracking? What is it that you're after, and how can we achieve that in a way that really enhances your well-being rather than leads to disordered eating and an obsession with food and your body, because it's not making this life any better for you. And relying on external information to tell you what your body needs is never going to be health promoting, ever. It's only going to drive that mental and emotional restriction we were talking about before, like always feeling deprived, even if you are quote unquote eating enough. Like, you're not eating the foods that you really want to eat. You're not listening to your body. You're disconnected from your hunger. Hell, you're disconnected from your fullness. And that's what leads people to like feel like they're emotional eating, because they don't know what it feels like to feel satisfied, because they're letting the calorie counting guide their choices. And it just keeps you living in this perpetual state of anxiety about, like, I mean, when you're tracking, you can't enjoy a meal out with people. You can't just enjoy food for what it is. And you're you're just never going to have peace. And I think really getting clear on that is paramount to overcoming this, because if you're not clear on why you want to stop tracking and what you want for yourself that you can never get by obsessing over what you're eating, then it's going to be really hard to heal, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Abby, this has been this conversation has had such range, and I want to thank you for that, because there has been, the opportunity to talk to women who may feel deprived or calorie counting or frustrated with the advice they've been given at their doctor's office, or even that have gone to macros with the idea that I have to make sure I'm eating enough, and how that type of obsession looks. And there really is such a range with how we treat food and how we obsess over food. And it doesn't look the same for every person. And it doesn't even for the same person, it changes at different stages. And this has been like a really helpful for like the range of whatever stage any of our listeners are at. Hopefully we hit some of those, because I really feel like I had different people popping into my mind for like
Yeah.
different ways you were talking about, maybe like macros and what that control feels like, and like, am I eating enough, and that obsession, or the obsession over calorie counting, or the obsession over body image, and what weight you should be at, or what your body fat percentage you should be at, and how it just is a constant way to create that control in an attempt to ease our anxiety. And we could adjust it. We
Mhm.
could make some adjustments.
It like blew my mind that all of those
Yeah.
behaviors are all things that we can track back to. But why are you doing this though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we always make all these outside reasons for why we're doing this. But, like, really, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to yourself in one form or the other? You could be at two extremes of that conversation and still be asked the same question.
Yes.
That is just like, that's blowing my mind. I have all kinds of goosebumps about it. Like, that's the real thing to uncover here.
Yes.
And that's a weird road, but like, wow, that's the one. That's the one.
It's hard and it's worth it because yeah, like going back to what we've said so many times, like what do we want for ourselves, right? Is this truly what we want for ourselves? Would we want this for anyone else? When we're 80, is this going to be the thing that we're happy that we did? You know? Like and it's so hard. It's so hard to get out of the specific moment you're in and the anxiety that you feel and look big picture. But that's what we have to do because we don't want to waste what we've got, right? And we've got this one body, we've got this one life. And what if instead of being at war with our body for our whole life, we decided this is it. I'm going to treat it well. I'm going to do what I can and I'm going to be here to do the real shit, the stuff that matters. And this body that I have, like it's just the vessel. Like it's just the way in which I get to experience this life. It's not the thing that I'm here like meant to control and focus on. Like that's just not it. That's not it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the hope for us.
That's the hope. That's why we do this, guys.
That's why we do this, guys. Abby, unbelievable conversation. Where can our listeners hear more from you? Because I know that they're going to absolutely adore you.
Oh, you guys are amazing. I have a podcast as well. It's called Full Plate Podcast. You can find that on Instagram at fullplate.podcast and it on all your podcast listening apps. We're going to have you both on. And then you can find me and about working with me at abbieattwoodwellness.com. I'm launching my next group program in January, so applications are open for that. So that's kind of the next thing happening for me. And then you can find me on Instagram at Abbie Attwood Wellness. Those are all the things.
That's perfect. Guys, definitely go check her out. We're going to link some of those or all of those in our show notes so you just kind of have an easy access to her, because one of the most important things that have come out of this conversation is this is an ongoing. This is not a like listen to one podcast, I have it figured out situation. This is ongoing work that is so worth it. But one of the things that I always try to just echo is like that ongoing work happens when you surround yourself with the messages that will promote that and will promote that healing. So you are one of those people in this space. So we were just like so excited to amplify your voice to our listeners and to, follow her and check her out so that, that's what you surround yourself with.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Abby.